Good evening, folks. Jeremy Rogalski here, continuing our discussion about the commercial sexual exploitation of children in Houston and around the country. It's all part of our ongoing series called Selling Girls, which airs every night this week at 10 o'clock on KHOU, as well as online, khou.com/selling girls. We encourage you on Facebook to share your comments and write in with questions. Here to help answer some of those questions is John Clark, the founder of Operation Texas Shield. John, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Operation Texas Shield, how did it come about and what is it all about?
So Operation Texas Shield, I started it actually just about a year ago, about 6 months after I got involved as an activist trying to against sex trafficking. And it's an organization that's established exclusively for the purpose of developing and promoting legislation in the state of Texas that helps punish criminals and protect victims.
Let's talk about the victim side first. You've done a lot of research into the process of what some call grooming, others call recruiting. Basically, it's the luring in of a young person into the sex trade. And you've identified sort of some common themes and threads without that. Let me hold this up, our very fancy graphics here. But the first three you talk about is befriend, intoxicate, and alienate. So put it in the context of, say, a 15 or 16-year-old girl out there in the Houston area. Befriend, intoxicate, alienate.
Well, the first thing to remember, Jeremy, is it's important to understand this is a process and it works over time. And the people who are trying to recruit our kids are dedicated to spending time and making it work over time. And they do it slowly. They lure them in.
They're conniving.
They are conniving. These guys are expert con men. They know what they're doing and they know how to recognize teenagers with low self-esteem that are vulnerable to this type of an approach. So it starts with befriend, and befriend is very simple and it's non-threatening because it's nothing more than a new friend added to the existing circle of friends. And it's really hard to see that, but it has a purpose, and the sole purpose of that befriend stage is to establish trust with the target.
And it's sometimes, to be clear, not the trafficker himself, but perhaps a recruiter, someone in their peer group, another 18 or 19-year-old who the recruiter sends in on his behalf to do his early dirty work.
Exactly. That's one of the scary things is a lot of these pimps have people working for them, and those people are in our schools and in our churches and in our neighborhoods and in our youth clubs and all of those things. And there's a variety of reasons for why they're doing it. Some of the girls that we found actually have been previously trafficked, and that's their ticket out. Others are getting some free drugs or alcohol for their parties or whatever. But whatever their hook is, the pimps a lot of times are kind of scary looking guys, but the recruiters aren't. They're very regular looking young girls a lot of times.
So obviously befriend is establishing trust. The intoxicate is offering them or enhancing either drugs and alcohol. Hey, come party with us.
Right.
We're the cool group sort of thing.
Exactly.
And then go to alienate. And what does that mean in this context of the grooming or recruiting process?
Well, first I'll back up to the intoxicate because it has a purpose as well. So it introduces drugs or alcohol or increases the frequency, but its purpose is to drive a wedge between the teen and their family. So it starts that friction. If your teen's coming home and all of a sudden they're intoxicated or they're more than they used to be, now there's that fighting there. And in the next stage, the alienate stage, that's when they start to leverage that friction. And the alienate stage is that new friend starts to sell to your teenager that your home life is horrible. Oh, I can't believe your mother treats you like that. Your dad's horrible. He grounds you all the time. Doesn't he know everyone does
your
that?
Your curfew is what on a Friday night?
Exactly.
How horrible is that? Okay,
exactly.
So alienate. And then the next three, let's talk about these briefly. Isolate, desensitize, capitalize. So now they're alienated. That wedges between the teen and her family. Isolate.
Isolate is working on their traditional group of friends, their older friends, right? So they've alienated from the family, now they isolate them, they cull them away from their crowd. You slowly start to introduce a new crowd of friends, and over a very short period of time you realize that your teenager's not hanging out with any of the kids that you know their parents, you know where they're going, you know what's going on, so it's just this all of a sudden this new group of friends.
Followed by desensitize. Explain.
So the desensitize is now there's a new group of friends. This has gone on for probably several weeks or months. Now in this new group of friends, it's slowly revealed that they're involved in things that only a few months ago would have really shocked or horrified or disgusted your teenager, but they're desensitizing them to things that are, whether it's drugs or whether it's pornography or whether it's other illegal activities, but things that they make them seem normal. And it's really the purpose of that stage is to kind of break that moral compass that as parents we build over years.
I was just going to say, it's like putting a magnet on what they used to know as right or wrong.
Exactly.
And then the big one, of course, the end game here is to capitalize. And that obviously comes with intimidation, manipulation, and often violence.
Exactly. So the capitalize is looking for the opportunity to pull your teen away. Now, if you think about all the things that have happened over the previous few months here while this process has been working, you've had a troubled teen arguing with their parents, getting intoxicated, hanging out with the wrong crowd. And so when they disappear, what does everybody think? Runaway. Well, you know what? They've been set up to look like a runaway in a lot of cases, and they're looking for a big fight with the family. And they've been saying, "I'll give you a place to stay. Let me know if you ever need a place to stay." Or it could be right after they turn 18. It could be that they just see the opportunity to grab that kid and take him, and they think that the police will believe it's a runaway. The parents don't know.
All the while, they're often posted online, or perhaps, all those free drugs and alcohol we've been provided, well, you have to pay that debt off.
Exactly.
And the price of that, scaringly, is turning a trick. John,
Exactly.
Let's look at some questions here and some comments from our viewers. Again, we're with John Clark, the founder of Operation Texas Shield. We're talking about our series, Selling Girls, the world of commercial sexual exploitation of our children. Tina Marie writes in, "This is such a scary ordeal." Tina, I couldn't say that any more loud or clear. Hilda writes in, "It is scary, especially when you have children." Paula writes in, "My daughter is a survivor who's now battling for her child. She is the victim, but it appears she's the issue. Fix the laws, please." That is a good segue into the laws. Last night, we talked about punishment for these pimps and how in Harris County, John, when you look at the stats over a 2.5-year period, 2/3 of defendants who pleaded guilty, this is not just arrested, these are guys who said, "Yes, I did it," did not get prison time, did not get jail time. Instead, they got a slap on the wrist, which is called deferred adjudication, which is a form of probation in Texas. Your organization is doing some very good, some very hard work to put more teeth into the laws we have on the books. Talk about that, sir.
Well, let's start with deferred education, because you and I have been talking about this issue for a while, and you're right. We're almost, as a society, inadvertently giving criminally minded people the incentive to pursue and traffic our children, because when they get caught, nothing happens to them.
If the cost of doing business is a couple days while you're waiting for your court hearing and ultimately a slap on the wrist, meaning probation, well, that's a low cost of business to pay.
And they're making plenty of money to pay the fines.
And so what is your hope here? Ultimately in Texas, what would you like to see happen?
So we have a law drafted that we're trying to get a sponsor for in the Texas legislature right now that would actually prevent that punishment. So if you get convicted of compelling or promoting the prostitution of a minor, probation and deferred adjudication are not an option. We don't have a sponsor for that bill yet. But we had some bills in the last legislature, some that passed and we made some good progress, but others that didn't. For example, a convicted pimp doesn't have to register as a sex offender, right?
Wow.
Which is just shocking to me that they don't have to register as a sex offender. So they're out there, they get out and they go right back to preying on our children over and over again. Same thing, we don't let pedophiles set up picnic blankets on school playgrounds. But we tried to pass a law that says if someone has prior convictions of pimping a minor, that it's illegal for them to be riding around in the car with minors who aren't in their immediate family, and that got shot down. So we're still battling, trying to strengthen the laws a little bit so that there'll be harsher penalties and there'll be a disincentive for doing that business.
Well, we appreciate those efforts indeed. Let's switch gears a little bit to when a survivor is rescued from the throes and control of a trafficker. Our research shows there are very few places for the long-term recovery of these survivors. You actually wear another hat, John. You're on the board of a group called The Refuge. Speak to that, and you have some interesting things and exciting things in the work in the next several months ahead.
Well, you're right, and your study showed that 27 states have no beds for these survivors.
Think about that. Let's just pause there.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of jaw-dropping because you have an entire nation, and in some states, in the entire state, there is not a place for the survivor to go where there is long-term recovery. And what we mean by that is not an emergency shelter where you get 3 hots and a cot, as they say. This, again, is a 9-month, 1 year, or longer period. And why is that important before we get into the refuge? Why do you need that long-term trauma-informed care?
That's it, because you just touched on it. It's trauma. These survivors, it's not just that they've got to have some, drug or alcohol rehabilitation or some, settling in a foster home or something. They've been severely traumatized. Their lives have been absolutely shattered. And the trauma treatment takes a long time to heal and recover from. It takes a long time for them to retrust the relationships that they need to have in life. And the manifestations of trauma, it takes a long time for them not to resurface very quickly, and it causes disruptive behavior and outbursts, and it's very difficult for these girls to get their lives back to some state of normalcy.
It's also very difficult for the average layperson out in the public to understand that there's some brainwashing going on.
Absolutely.
I mean, they have convinced, through coercion and intimidation and manipulation, they have convinced these young girls that they're not victims, and so there needs to be, it's been described to me as kind of a deprogramming of the mind.
To make them where they don't feel guilty and responsible for everything that's happened, and make them feel like their families will love them again, people will accept them again, they don't deserve what happened to them.
Now, back to long-term places to care. You shared an interesting perspective on this in terms of the few numbers of facilities in the nation as compared to what? You compared it to
animal shelters.
All right.
13,000 animal shelters across the United States, and there are only a few hundred beds for long-term treatment of sex trafficking survivors.
That is disturbing. That is startling. So there's more safe places for runaway stray dogs and cats than there are for this traumatized population of young girls. When you put it into that perspective, it obviously raises the question, do more funds need to be earmarked for these things? And as part of the refuge, now let's talk about the refuge. What is, give folks out there watching Facebook, where is it going to be generally, and what kind of facility?
So the refuge, I'm really proud of the work that we're doing at the refuge, and it's an organization it's going to be a ranch that's on 50 acres. It's outside of the Austin area. We don't disclose the exact location. Sure. But it's going to be all-inclusive and holistic, trauma-informed care, and everything is going to be there on the property for those survivors. So they will have a family unit, they'll have foster parents, they'll have other girls that are living in those cottages with them, they'll attend their educational services, they'll get their medical treatment, they'll get their therapeutic treatment like equine and art therapy and pet therapy and all those things. So everything that they need will be right there in that environment, and it's going to be a very holistic healing environment for the girls, and they can stay there as long as they need to be there.
And you hoping to open the doors next year?
First quarter of 2018, that's correct.
Wonderful. Let's go to some more comments on Facebook. Paula writes in, they need therapy for the trauma. They have to be both as well as reprogrammed. I think that's a very good point.
Excellent.
Paula, thanks for writing in. She also says this is likened to Stockholm Syndrome. For those who are not familiar with the term, share that.
Stockholm Syndrome is when the abused person finds some bonding in some unusual way to the person who's abusing them. And over time, it's very real and it happens. And a lot of these girls actually feel like they love the pimp. Some of them are coming from broken backgrounds. But as they break these girls down, they find out what they need, and then they provide. The girl starts to think that, okay, well, this person's providing me with a house, they're providing me with my food, they're buying my clothes, they must love me. They're my only source of what I need.
Because on one hand, again, to the layperson who's not in the game, as it's called, or not familiar, the common sense and logical reaction is, well, he's selling your body for sex, why not just run?
Right.
And that's a fair question.
Right.
But what do people not understand why they can't just get up and run?
And actually, a lot of times when they first entangle these girls into it, they go through a breaking period, and that's breaking them psychologically. Sure. And they don't really traffic them until they're very confident that they won't just run. And there's a psychological point when they gain confidence that the girl won't run. Sometimes they're abducted, sometimes they're held under lock and key, but that's not usually the case.
Another writer writes in, I used to think this was only a foreign problem. Good point, because there is that sort of misinformation out there that it's happening in some faraway place, and that's not the case.
That's exactly right. That's a great statement, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. few years ago, before I got involved in this, I thought it was about immigrants and runaways and foster kids, but the statistics show us something very different. Only 3% of the cases confirmed by the Department of Justice for sex trafficking were for children born outside the United States. It's our kids right here, our families, just like yours and mine, that are being impacted. And another one, University of Pennsylvania did a study that says 76% of the survivors they surveyed, I believe I got the numbers right, but it's 2,000 survivors from 17 cities, and 76% of them came from upper and middle income homes. Those aren't foster kids.
3/4 upper and middle class homes. Speak to those homeowners, those parents, in closing here, John. What do you, as a parent yourself, what do you tell those parents, based on all the research you've done and the efforts you're doing, who have daughters out there who are at this age? Talk to them.
I would tell you to, don't ever be worried about being overprotective of your children in this area. They have access to so many more things than we did when we were their age. You have to go through their phones. You have to understand how to use the applications that they're on. You have to understand that people are out there targeting them using those applications. Talk to them about it. Watch for changes in their friends. And if you recognize the process happening in your family, then intervene quickly, because once you get to the isolate stage, it's very hard to turn it.
And if you feel overwhelmed, parents, reach out to organizations like those that John is involved. Again, it's the Refuge, as well as Operation Texas Shield. John, Clark, we appreciate your time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Our series continues tonight. It's called Selling Girls, and you can also see it online at khou.com/sellinggirls. Hope you'll watch tonight on KHOU 11 News at 10.